David Martinez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he watched his 5-year-old daughter Emma play on the rusty swing set behind their small apartment building. The autumn sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, but David barely noticed the beauty around him. His mind was occupied with tomorrow's bills and the empty refrigerator waiting upstairs. 3 years had passed since his wife Sarah died in a car accident, leaving him to raise Emma alone. At 32, David had aged beyond his years. His once bright eyes now carried the weight of sleepless nights and endless worry. Working 2 jobs as a mechanic during the day and a security guard at night barely kept him afloat, but he never complained. Emma was his world, his reason to keep fighting. "Daddy, look how high I can swing," Emma called out, her blonde curls bouncing as she pumped her small legs. Her infectious laughter filled the empty playground, a sound that always managed to lift David's spirits, no matter how heavy his heart felt. "Be careful, princess," David replied, forcing a smile. He glanced at his watch and sighed. In an hour, he would have to leave for his night shift, and Mrs. Chun from upstairs would watch Emma. The elderly woman was kind enough to help for free, understanding their situation, but David hated imposing on her generosity. As Emma continued playing, David noticed movement near the apartment building's entrance. A young woman emerged from the shadows, walking slowly toward the small garden area behind the building. She was thin, almost frail, wearing a faded dress that had seen better days and a worn jacket that hung loosely on her shoulders. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried a small canvas bag that looked like it contained everything she owned. The woman sat down on a concrete bench near the garden and pulled out what appeared to be a piece of bread. She broke it into small pieces, eating slowly, savoring each bite as if it might be her last meal. David watched her from the corner of his eye, something stirring in his chest. He had seen that look before, the careful way she ate, the way she glanced around as if expecting someone to tell her she didn't belong there. It was the look of someone who had known real hunger. Emma noticed the woman too, and, being the curious child she was, stopped swinging and walked over to David. "Daddy, who is that lady?" She looked sad. David looked at his daughter, always amazed by her ability to see straight to the heart of things. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe she's just tired." The woman looked up then, noticing David and Emma watching her. For a moment, their eyes met, and David felt something unexpected, a jolt of recognition. Not because he knew her, but because he saw something familiar in her expression. It was the same determination mixed with exhaustion that he saw in his own mirror every morning. She had beautiful eyes, David noticed, deep brown and expressive, despite the obvious fatigue etched around them. There was intelligence there and kindness, but also a wariness that spoke of difficult experiences. She offered a small, hesitant smile before looking away, clearly uncomfortable with the attention. "Can we say hi to her?" Emma asked, tugging on David's hand. "Maybe she's lonely." David hesitated. He had learned to be cautious about strangers, especially around Emma. But something about this woman didn't feel threatening. If anything, she looked like someone who needed help, not someone who would cause harm. "Okay, but we'll just say hello," David agreed, taking Emma's hand as they walked toward the bench. The woman looked up as they approached, her body tensing slightly. Up close, David could see that despite her worn clothes and tired appearance, she was probably around his age, maybe a little younger. There was a quiet dignity about her, the way she sat straight despite her obvious exhaustion. "Hi," Emma said brightly, unaware of any social awkwardness. "I'm Emma, and this is my daddy. We live upstairs. What's your name?" The woman's face softened at Emma's innocent approach. "Hello, Emma. I'm Maria." Her voice was gentle, with a slight accent that David couldn't quite place. "It's nice to meet you both. Are you new here?" David asked, sitting down on the edge of the bench while Emma bounced beside him. "I don't think I've seen you around the building before." Maria's cheeks flushed slightly. I'm staying with my cousin Rosa in apartment 2B, just temporarily. I arrived this morning from El Salvador." David nodded, understanding filling his expression. The Martinez family in 2B had mentioned expecting a relative, but he hadn't thought much about it at the time. Rose is your cousin? She's a sweet lady. Makes the best tamales in the building. A small smile crossed Maria's face. Yes, she does. She's been very kind to me. Emma, who had been studying Maria with the intense curiosity of a 5-year-old, suddenly blurted out, "Are you hungry? You were eating that bread really slow, like when Daddy and I have to make our food last longer." Emma. David felt his face burn with embarrassment, but Maria actually laughed, a soft, musical sound that seemed to surprise even her. "It's okay," Maria said, looking at Emma with genuine warmth. "Your daughter is very observant. Yes, I was hungry, but Rosa fed me well tonight. I was just thinking." David found himself studying Maria more closely. Despite her worn appearance, there was something compelling about her. The way she spoke to Emma with such gentleness, the grace with which she handled his daughter's innocent but pointed questions, the quiet strength he sensed beneath her fragile exterior. "Thinking about what?" Emma asked, settling down cross-legged on the ground in front of the bench, clearly prepared for a long conversation. Maria glanced at David, as if seeking permission to continue talking to his daughter. He nodded encouragingly, finding himself genuinely curious about this mysterious woman's story. "I was thinking about tomorrow," Maria said carefully, "about finding work. I need to contribute to Rose's household and start building a life here." "What kind of work do you do?" David asked, surprised by his own interest. Maria's expression grew uncertain. "In El Salvador, I was a teacher. I taught children Emma's age. But here," she gestured helplessly, "my credentials don't transfer easily. I'm willing to do anything honest: cleaning, cooking, childcare. I just need someone to give me a chance." David felt something shift inside him. A teacher. That explained the gentle way she spoke to Emma, the patience in her voice. He thought about his own struggles to find reliable, affordable childcare, about the nights when Mrs. Chun couldn't help, and he had to choose between missing work or leaving Emma alone. "Teaching is a good job," Emma declared with the authority of a 5-year-old who loved school. "My teacher, Miss Anderson, says teachers are heroes because they help kids learn important stuff." Maria's smile was radiant this time, transforming her tired face. "Miss Anderson sounds very wise. Teaching was my passion back home. I hope someday I can do it again here." The conversation was interrupted by David's phone buzzing. He glanced at it and groaned internally. His supervisor at the security company, probably calling about tonight's shift. "Excuse me, I need to take this." As David stepped away to answer the call, Emma continued chatting with Maria, asking about El Salvador and sharing stories about school and her favorite games. David couldn't help but notice how naturally they interacted, how Emma's typical shyness around strangers seemed to disappear completely. The phone call confirmed his fears. He needed to be at work in 30 minutes, not an hour as he'd originally planned. A sick colleague meant David would have to pull a double shift. He hung up with a heavy heart, knowing this meant less sleep and more exhaustion tomorrow. When he returned to the bench, Emma was showing Maria a small flower she had picked from the garden. "This is for you," his daughter was saying. "Daddy says flowers make people happy when they're sad." Maria accepted the flower with tears in her eyes. "Thank you, Emma. This is the most beautiful flower I've ever received." "I have to go," David announced reluctantly. "Work calls. Emma, we need to go see Mrs. Chun." As they prepared to leave, Maria stood as well. "It was wonderful meeting you both. Thank you for being so kind to a stranger." David found himself hesitating. There was something about this woman that drew him in, made him want to know more about her story. But he was also cautious by nature now, protective of Emma and the small, stable life they had built together. "Maybe we'll see you around the building," he said finally. "I'd like that," Maria replied softly. As they walked toward the building entrance, Emma turned back to wave at Maria, who was gathering her things from a bench. "I like her, Daddy," Emma declared. "She has kind eyes like Grandma Sarah used to have." David's heart clenched at the mention of his mother-in-law, Sarah's mother, who had passed away the previous year. Emma rarely mentioned family members they had lost, and When she did, it was always with such innocent clarity that it took his breath away. After settling Emma with Mrs. Chun and grabbing his security uniform, David headed out for his long night shift. But as he drove through the quiet streets, he found his thoughts returning to the woman in the garden. There had been something in her eyes, a depth of experience that intrigued him, and the way Emma had responded to her. His typically cautious daughter had opened up immediately, as if recognizing a kindred spirit. David shook his head, trying to focus on the road ahead. He didn't have time for complications in his life, especially romantic ones. His priority was Emma, keeping their heads above water, building a secure future for his daughter. Getting involved with a struggling immigrant woman who had her own problems to solve would be foolish at best, potentially disastrous at worst. But even as he tried to dismiss his interest, David couldn't forget the grace with which Maria had handled Emma's innocent questions, or the way her face had lit up when she talked about teaching. There had been something genuine about her, something that felt rare in his experience. The security job was at a small office complex downtown, and the night passed slowly as it always did. David made his rounds, checked doors and windows, and tried not to think about the empty apartment waiting for him at dawn. But his mind kept drifting back to the garden, to brown eyes and a gentle smile, to the way Emma had immediately trusted someone new. By morning, David had convinced himself that his interest in Maria was just loneliness talking. He was a single father with no time for romance, and she was a woman with her own struggles to overcome. Their paths had crossed briefly in a garden, nothing more. But as he drove home through the early morning traffic, David found himself looking forward to seeing if Maria might be in the garden again that evening. Just to be neighborly, he told himself. Just to make sure she was settling in okay with her cousin Rosa. He pulled into the apartment complex parking lot just as the sun was fully rising, painting the building in warm golden light. As he walked toward the entrance, David glanced toward the garden area where he had met Maria the night before. She wasn't there, of course. It was early morning, and she was probably sleeping or helping her cousin with breakfast. But David found himself disappointed by her absence, a feeling that surprised him with its intensity. Inside the apartment, Mrs. Chun was dozing in the recliner while Emma slept soundly in her bedroom. David thanked the elderly woman quietly and settled her cab fare, grateful as always for her help. After she left, he stood in his small living room, looking around at the modest space he and Emma called home. The apartment wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a combined living and dining area, a small kitchen with appliances that had seen better days. But it was clean and safe, filled with Emma's artwork and the few family photos that had survived their various moves. It was home, and David was proud of what he had managed to provide for his daughter on his own. Still, standing there in the quiet morning light, David couldn't help but notice how empty the place felt. Not empty of love. Emma filled every corner with her bright presence, but empty of adult companionship, of shared conversations, and quiet understanding. He had been so focused on survival and providing for Emma that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to connect with another adult on a deeper level. The thought of Maria's gentle voice and kind eyes stirred something in David that had been dormant for a long time. But he pushed the feeling aside, reminding himself of his priorities. Emma needed stability, not complications. As he prepared for his few hours of sleep before his afternoon shift at the garage, David told himself that Maria was just a neighbor, nothing more. But deep down, he knew that the woman in the garden had already begun to change something inside him, even if he wasn't ready to admit it yet. The last thing David thought about before falling asleep was Emma's words. She has kind eyes like Grandma Sarah used to have. His daughter's instinct about people were usually spot on. Maybe, just maybe, Maria was someone worth getting to know better. But that was a decision for another day when he was less tired and more capable of thinking clearly. For now, David needed sleep, and Emma needed her father to be strong and steady. Everything else would have to wait. Outside their window, The garden where they had met Maria sat empty in the morning sunshine, waiting for evening to bring new encounters and new possibilities. 3 days passed before David saw Maria again. Those 3 days felt longer than they should have, though David tried not to think about why. He went about his routine. Morning shift at the garage, afternoon with Emma, evening shift at the security job, but found himself glancing toward the garden area more often than usual. On Thursday evening, as he was helping Emma with her homework at the small kitchen table, he heard voices outside their window. Emma's head popped up from her coloring book, always alert to activity in their quiet building. "Daddy, I think that's Maria," Emma announced, dropping her crayon and rushing to the window. "She's with Cousin Rosa in the garden." David tried to appear casual as he joined Emma at the window, but his heart rate quickened when he saw Maria kneeling beside a small flower bed, pulling weeds while Rosa pointed out different plants. Maria was wearing the same worn dress as before, but she had added a colorful scarf around her neck that brightened her whole appearance. Her hair was loose today, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. "Can we go say hi?" Emma asked, already heading for the door. David glanced at the clock. He didn't have to leave for work for another hour, and Emma's homework was nearly finished. "All right, but just for a few minutes." They found Maria and Rosa working together to clear the neglected flower bed behind the building. Rosa, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes, looked up as they approached. "David and little Emma," Rosa called out warmly. "Perfect timing. Maria was just telling me about meeting you both the other night." Maria looked up from her weeding, dirt smudged on her cheek, and a genuine smile brightening her face. "Hello again. Rosa was showing me how to care for the garden. She says the previous tenants let it go, but it could be beautiful again with some work." Emma immediately plopped down beside Maria, fascinated by the small pile of weeds they had collected. "Are you going to plant flowers?" "I love flowers, especially the yellow ones that look like tiny suns." "Marigolds," Maria said, grinning at Emma's description. "Those are called marigolds, and yes, Rosa thinks we could plant some here in the spring. They're cheerful flowers, aren't they?" David found himself watching Maria as she interacted with Emma, noting how naturally she engaged with his daughter's endless questions and observations. There was something peaceful about the scene, the three of them working in the earth while Rosa shared stories about the building's history. "Maria has been such a help," Rosa told David as she brushed dirt from her hands. "She insists on earning her keep, even though I tell her she's family. Today she cleaned my apartment top to bottom and organized my kitchen better than it's been in years." A flush crept up Maria's neck. "Rosa has been so generous. It's the least I can do." David noticed the slight defensiveness in her tone, the way she seemed uncomfortable accepting charity, even from family. It was a feeling he understood all too well, the struggle to maintain dignity while accepting help you desperately needed. "Have you had any luck finding work?" David asked gently. Maria's expression grew more guarded. "I've applied at several places. A few restaurants, some cleaning services, a daycare center." "But," she trailed off, not finishing the thought. "But what?" Emma asked with characteristic directness. Rosa answered when Maria hesitated. "Some places want papers that Maria is still waiting for. Mija. It takes time to get everything processed when you move to a new country."